Welcome back, everybody. This is Edwin the Magic Engineer again, and as promised, I'm going to go through a budget deck again. This time it's going to be green, as you can see with all the little pretty green things set up. So again, this is just a budget deck, and this is part of that series where I'm doing budget old school builds, and I'm doing it specifically to show everyone out there that you can actually build a budget deck. And no, we're not going to throw money at this problem. No. That you can actually build a budget deck in old school. You don't actually have to throw money at it to make it actually good. No, we're not going to do a budget deck. It's budget. This is going to be budget. We're not going to throw money at this. Okay. So anyways, the purpose of this deck is to just kind of be monocolored, and this is a starting point like the other decks that I've been showing in my videos. You don't have to stick with this build. Feel free to take this idea, run with it, adjust it, but I can tell you I have played this against powered decks and other budget decks, and it's done very well. And no, we're not going to put big, powerful, expensive cards in here right now, just budget. This deck has been playing against those, and it has been doing good. It even took out my Turbo Stasis deck a few times. So why don't we just start going through the deck? So starting off, we've got a bunch of creatures that I'm intending to be very tough for a lot of different deck archetypes to deal with. And these were very specifically selected to be low cost. They stick with the aggressive thing. No, we're sticking to budget. They're selected to be low-cost aggression, and each of them kind of has a specific type of deck archetype or color that they're trying to actually go against. The druids obviously are against artifact decks. If people are playing lots of artifacts, if you go against a powered deck, especially hopefully if you can get them out quickly, these guys are huge because every time your opponent is casting that artifact, they get a little bit bigger and they become very threatening very fast. The scavenger folk are part of the actual creature removal, but they also just happen to be a good 1/1 attacker. But oftentimes when I play these, I just leave them on the table and I don't actually... No, we're not going to play expensive cards. This is a budget deck. They ended up just sitting there untapped, forcing my opponent to be very reserved and very not wanting to, not wanting to be too aggressive because at any moment I could pop the scavenger folk. And obviously the whirling dervishes are there to go against black decks. And sometimes these guys are so threatening that even though black decks are discarding and hitting and really, really hard, they actually still are able to win the game because my opponents just can't deal with them. Okay, no, that's we're good. This is not going to be an expensive thing. This is going to be budget. Okay, so hopefully that's the last of that. So that was my daughter helping out, by the way. So anyways, the low cost, hard to deal with creatures are definitely part of the strategy. They come out quick and they have specific deck archetypes they're going against. Then the next section of the deck has got some beef for the creatures. Urnam Jin is, of course, just fantastic. It's hard to not want to play with him if you've got him. He's just such a big creature for so low casting mana. And even with the cheap mana acceleration, the elves and things like that, Urnam Jin is really tough. So he's fantastic and not expensive. I've got some cockatrices here. And they are amazing because you don't have a lot of good green flyers. In old school format, they're actually pretty good because 5 mana isn't too hard to come to when you've got elves and stuff. And they are a 2/4 flyer. They don't have a ton of attack, but that venom ability to just destroy creatures is really good with the cockatrice, especially when you copy it or team it up with other stuff that I've got in here that you'll see. So they actually are pretty good beef. The biggest beef in the deck is a Force of Nature. And, I can see, this Force of Nature is very well loved. I don't know how many years I've had this for, but I think I actually got it like this because I've been playing with sleeves, since forever. So, yeah, Force of Nature is just a big, tough creature. And there's only one in the deck. When other people build this deck, they might change the ratios and such. But this is what I started with, and it's actually been working so far. So, in terms of aggressive attacking creatures, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17 aggressive attacking creatures, which is a pretty good balance there, right? Now for the creature pumping, we've got, of course, the giant growths. these are, of course, fantastic. They're really, they've been proven over years to be just fantastic. And something that you can do that a lot of people forget is if you have something like, let me dig down to them. Say you have a Llanowar Elf in play, right? You can pull the same kind of trick with these guys that you can pull with like a Mishra's Factory. Like people might attack even though you got like a Llanowar Elf sitting there untapped and just kind of ready to respawn, because they'll look at it and think a 1/1 elf. And like, let's say all your mana is tapped, so you don't have any other ability to like, you know, to play any other mana except for this mana himself. People forget that what you can actually do is you can declare the Llanowar Elf as a blocker. And after he's declared as a blocker, you can now tap him, Giant Growth him, and he'll be a 4/4 blocker. So people forget that about that card actually all the time. So Giant Growth is just fantastic. But then when you couple it with the next section, you know, the Berserks, I gotta say, you guys, I know I'm intending this to be a budget deck, and I just dropped 4 Berserks on the table. But just trust me, it's worth it. I mean, right as of this moment, since Berserk got reprinted, you can pick up at least the unlimited ones without too much money. And I know this is at least a little bit of expense in the deck, but it's not like power cards. It's not, you know, hundreds of dollars each. You can pick them up for decent prices at the moment. And let me tell you, Berserk is a house. I mean, you can destroy people with this card. The number of games that ended basically because I berserked multiple times, maybe after a Giant Growth, was amazing. I mean, this deck basically wins because of the Berserks. It is really tough. Now, I did actually put some lures into the deck, and I'm sure the first thought that almost all of you thought, oh yeah, he's got Cockatrice in there. He must have put the lures in there for the Cockatrice. Well, no, not exactly. The lures, yes, are in here for the Cockatrice, and that is a pretty big deal because you can, you know, wipe out someone's creature horde. If they have a bunch of flyers you attack and all their flyers block the Cockatrice, yeah, sure, that's there and it's valid. But the main reason the lures are actually in there is just because if you're sitting there with a bunch of creatures that have also inflated in size and you're beating them down, you can take something stupid, just like, you know, your Llanowar Elf, put the lure on it, and swing, so your opponent is going to have to put all of his blockers here, and then all your other guys can get by, and then you're free to Berserk and Giant Growth and get, you know, one of your other creatures through for a lot of damage. So yes, the lure can work with the Cockatrice, but it's mostly in there just to divert all of your opponent's blockers like a different direction, right? That's kind of the idea behind it. So now that you see there's the creature beats and assists, what you've also got is a couple Ice Storms, and I put those in because I'll get to the mana in a sec, but I'm also packing 4 Strip Mines. And so with 6 slots to mana destruction, what you're going to have the ability to do really well with people is you're going to have the ability to just like shut off their additional mana, alter their strategy, force them into defense a little bit. Because remember, like many of my other budget decks, this is an aggressive creature deck. And aggressive creature decks, you want to keep people in early game. You want to keep them at that spot. Like if you're playing against this deck, much like my other budget decks, and you're constantly thinking, oh, if I only had 1 more mana, or if I only had 2 more mana, then I could do this. That's kind of where you want to keep them. You don't want to let them get ahead of the curve because you're pushing aggression on them with the creatures. You're keeping their mana a little bit suppressed. It's not a land destruction deck. It's just meant to keep them in early game, like much like some of the other decks I've been showing, the other budget decks. Let me get this cleaned up a little bit. So there's creatures, and then there's the Berserks and Giant Growths, and there's the Ice Storms. So now also to keep your card draw engine going, green doesn't have a lot of good card draw. So I got a couple Sylvan libraries here for just having the ability to kind of keep what you've got coming, keep your hand efficiency pretty good. I really wish I had some shuffle ability in this deck. There isn't an awful lot of that with green and old school. But, you know, still the Sylvan is just really fantastic for being able to pull out the right card at the right time. And oftentimes, just to keep that pressure on people, I will, in fact, pay the 4 life and get an additional card. Both so I can dig deeper to find other, you know, threats and answers, but also just to keep my card advantage going. So, I got one Desert Twister main deck. I was playtesting with more of them earlier, and you can put more in the sideboard. It is a very expensive card, but it does remove anything. So if there's something unexpected in the deck, then you can definitely use this. When I playtested this deck with like 2 to 3 Desert Twisters, I often found myself with a lot of Desert Twisters in hand early game, and they were just dead cards because I didn't have the mana to play them. Or I did, but I really needed to keep the pressure on. And so I limited it down to 1 Desert Twister, and this is like a get out of jail free card if you can't quite get to something. Now also, you got to have a regrowth if you're playing green. So whatever solution is in your graveyard, you need to be able to get it back. So regrowth is just self-explanatory, right? Got to have it in there. Now these are my only proxies here at the moment. I have 2 Pendle Heavens in the mail on their way to me now, but they didn't arrive yet, and I didn't want to make this video wait any longer. So yeah, of course the Pendle Havens are really huge because you do in fact have a lot of 1/1 creatures. The Druids start out as 1/1, the Dervishes start out as 1/1, and the Scavenger Folk start out as 1/1. And then also in the mana, you got the Llanowar Elves that are all 1/1. So you have a decent amount of targets that are all going to be there for the Pendle Heavens to actually affect. So they're definitely a good land in the deck. I only put 2 of them in because they are legendary lands, and you can't have multiple of them in play. So I figured any more than 2 and you might end up with a lot of Pendle Heavens in your hand, and then you're just kind of mana limited, right? So 2 of those. And then I've also got 4 Strip Mines. So I did design this for Eternal Central rules. This list would definitely get adjusted quite a bit if it was for Channel Fireball rules. But now that you have this 6 mana destruction with the Ice Storms and the Strip Mines, then you have, of course, your mana ability and to keep them off of their lands. And so it's kind of like if you play Eternal Central, you kind of have to have 4 strips. It's just such an effective tactic, right? Now, then I also did put Mishra's Factories in. I only put 3 of them at the moment because this deck really needs green, kind of like the black deck that I was playing really needed its black mana, and also because it's Eternal Central and you got 4 strips. You can't have too much colorless mana coming out. It really puts you in a bad spot, especially when you're trying to cast your elves and your birds. So 7 colorless mana sources being part of the mana curve is pretty tough for getting your colors. So I went down to 3 Mishra's Factories. If you played in Channel Fireball rules, and of course these would come out, then that 4th factory I think would just come right in. Would be one of the changes I would definitely do with it. And the factories are great because if you play against like Abyss or something that's going to be knocking your creatures off the board, factory gets right around that. If people play Wrath of God, factory gets right around that as well. So it's just a fantastic land and definitely wins games. And then also 1 Soul Ring because the revised versions are not expensive, so it can fit with budget. And there's a decent amount of colorless cards, the Ice Storms, especially the Urnams in there. The Cockatrice, even the Force of Nature. I mean, there's a decent amount of spells that all require colorless mana that the Soul Ring is definitely really good for. Now, in terms of the mana curve, you guys already saw, I have the 4 Llanowar Elves, and these guys are just huge. I love my beta set, by the way. I love these cards. So, the Llanowar Elves are needed in here for speed, because since this is budget, I mean, you got a Soul Ring, you got Elves, and then you got a couple birds. You don't have a lot of options for speed. And that's actually one reason that's really unfortunate is part of the strategy was the Druid, right? If you at least had Moxes in here, if this deck did become powered, the Druid would be a lot better because you could play him on turn 1 before your opponent goes, and then when they drop their Soul Rings and Moxes and things, he gets better right off the bat. So it's really unfortunate you can't play the Druid turn 1 because the Elves and the birds just aren't quite fast enough. So that's kind of unfortunate, but you also might notice I did 2 birds instead of 4 birds. And that's because this is an aggressive creature deck. You don't need the multiple colors of mana, you only need the green. And so the Elves actually are better targets for the Pendle Haven. And I considered actually leaving the birds out entirely. But then the deck just didn't seem to have enough additional speed to get things out fast, because you only have this in terms of like mana acceleration, right? So there was a balance to be had. I put the 2 birds in instead of the 4 because I needed some speed, but I didn't put too many in because they're Llanowar Elves in this deck is just a better mana generator, right? And then the rest of the lands are just basic lands, and then there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 basic forests that are going to be in the deck. So I think, what is this, 25 mana sources that this comes out to? We'll count this real quick. Sorry, guys. I should have remembered that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27. 27 mana sources. So that's a good amount, but remember, you kind of quasi-count the creatures as mana sources. So it's kind of like 23 more typical mana sources and then a bunch of creatures that kind of fill that slot. So there's a bit of a balance there. You can go lower in the number of lands, but you can't go too low because you do need the 1 green to get those creatures started. So that's the deck and the mana sources. Now for the budget sideboard. If you're going to play against blue or decks that play a lot of control and keep big hands, Stormseeker is amazing. It'll just smash people in the face really hard and get that finishing damage. And it'll also, if you have a control player, it'll force them to pull back and try to keep some counter magic open. So just the fact that they've seen a Stormseeker, even if they counter it, they're going to play a bit more reserved, and then that is your opportunity to get those 1/1s on the table and start plinking them away with like some little 1/1s in some factories and wherever they are, and the Pendelhavens, right? To start like plinking them away and getting their life low, because you make people go back on defense when you get the Stormseekers out. So that's mostly against control and blue players, but anyone who keeps a big hand of cards. So we got the Dervishes in there, and so I'm not sure we need the life forces, but in case a black deck was still having your number and you needed more answers for black, you've got the life force. This one's really tough for a black deck because, as you remember, black doesn't have a lot of enchantment destruction. I mean, nearly none except for like Nevinral's Disc, just main color, right? They got a splash for other things. So a life force on the table oftentimes will just end the game for a black opponent. But this one, again, is a balance. I'll need more playtesting to see if the Dervishes are enough on their own, and if not, we've got those. If you need more artifact destruction, I've got 2 more Scavenger Folk that can come in against very artifact-heavy decks. And they're great because they're Pendelhaven targets, they're aggressive green creatures, and they can also blow up lock pieces that your opponents might be playing. So that's all just fantastic. And if you need even more, there's a couple of Crumbles that are here. And these ones do actually give life. And that is exactly what you're trying to tear down for your opponent. So that sucks, but they are 1 green instant, which is really great. And so you can play them on your opponent's end step, and then try to get some other threats onto the table. So they're great if you need more enchantment or artifact destruction. If you need enchantment destruction, I do have Tranquilities, and people always forget about these. And yes, there are Tranquilities in my own deck. There is the Sylvan Library, there is the Life Force. There's not a ton, but there is some. And so you will possibly hit your own. But, oftentimes, if that's the way the game is going to go and their deck is enchantment heavy, you can just board out your enchantments and then just go with the Tranquilities and not have any negative effects at all. But there is no, green disenchant in old school. You got the Crumbles and the Tranquilities and things like that. But these are great because they're efficient. They'll hit many different enchantments at once. In case you needed more black defense, 1 more Whirling Dervish in the actual sideboard. So again, these are all questionable if the main Dervishes are enough. And if you're going against a deck that has a really hard time shutting down, you have a hard time shutting down their creatures and getting through for damage, the Winter Blast is fantastic. I believe these were printed in Legends. And these will actually tap down creatures, and it'll also do 2 damage to flyers if they actually have them. So they're great for getting your creatures by and getting that last little bit of damage. So I threw those in there as well. So that's the sideboard for the deck. And again, this is just a simple budget old school deck. And like I was saying, guys, I did play test this against a lot of like other decks, and it was in fact very viable. It was surprising. And again, most of the time the game ended when this deck was dropping Berserks like crazy on people. So don't underestimate, you know, the Berserks. And I know they're a bit more spendy card, but they're not as spendy, and they are a house. So one last thing before I finish this video. I normally try to say, here's a direction you can go to upgrade the deck later, and I show like other expensive cards, you know, but like Chaos Orb and stuff like that. But in this time, I'm not going to mention anything, and there's a very specific reason. I had a hard time building this green old school deck because, like, if you build a black old school deck, there's just all these obvious answers. Oh, well, you gotta play Hippies. You gotta play Dark Ritual. If you have Jazam, you gotta play him. There's just all these obvious cards that are so good, you just gotta play him. And so the field for black gets very narrow because there's terrible black cards and there's amazing black cards. Green is different. Green has so many creatures to choose from. I mean, you got Argothian Pixies, you got Scrib Sprites, you got the bees and stuff. There's so many good creatures, and all these different creatures and green cards shove the deck kind of like in one direction or another. And based on that, I can't give you a list of here's direct upgrades to put in here. I mean, beyond the obvious, a Lotus or a Mox Emerald or a Chaos Orb, sure, yeah, those would fit in any deck. But like a lot of the other green cards you can put in, they'll take this deck in a different direction. And that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But it makes it so I can't give you a direct, like, here's the path to go through to actually upgrade, you know, this deck. Because this one is balanced and works as it is. And any other cards you put in is really going to change the flavor and the operation of this deck. So anyways, I hope you guys liked it. This was my green old school budget deck. Please like the video. Please give me some comments. I'd love to hear what you all think of it. And thanks everyone for attending. Bye.